For the longest time, the laptop industry has comfortably settled into preset sizes for laptops, usually dictated by their 16:9 displays. There's the 13 to 14-inch minis, the 15-inch standards, and the 17-inch ultrabooks. But as the tech world progresses, we ask more and more of our devices. And in 2023, we finally see that size template broken. Almost all Windows gaming laptop manufacturers are standardizing their 16:10 display-equipped laptops this year. And for my first go at this bigger and supposedly better form factor, I've got the ROG STRIX G16 here. And we're here to answer one question. Are you really getting that much more laptop with an inch and almost $400 on top of last year's offerings? Let's find out. Before we continue with this video, I would like to remind you that if you are enjoying this content, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. I'm a solo content creator and I do all this to make sure that all of you are informed about the products you're about to purchase. Every subscription helps keep this channel running. Thank you. Now, on to the video. As is usual with my reviews, we start at the outside. The ROG STRIX G16 comes in a combination build, with most of the body in this hard textured plastic and the cover plate and the top plate in thin metal. This is not the same kind of coated thicker aluminum that we see in the Zephyrus line, but it still feels pretty solid in the hand. And this laptop being really large and thick really adds to that feeling. It measures 35.4 cm wide, 26.4 cm long, and 3.4 cm at its thickest point. So make sure that you've got space in your bag and you've got strength in your shoulders because this is a heavy burden to bear while walking around. There are no creaks in the body nor in the hinges though, and there is very little screen wobble. There is a small amount of screen flex though, so you might want to be careful with that. Oh, and the light bar makes a return here at the front. It's bright and beautiful and it looks super extra as always. The keyboard and trackpad are standard fare. It seems like a direct lift from last year's STRIX G15, albeit moved around slightly. It's still a pretty good keyboard with a moderate travel distance and a soft bottom out, but they're not squishy enough to ruin my typing experience. You do miss out on a fingerprint reader though. The trackpad is huge and has finally lost the trackpad delay that plagued the STRIX G15. It is now totally responsive and has great palm rejection. I would like to point out though that some of ROG's marketing material about the G16 might not be totally accurate. If you go on the ROG website page of the G16 right now, you're going to see that in almost all of the images of this laptop, the Asus number pad is prominently displayed in all photos, which is totally not the case for the unit with me, nor with any of the units I've seen sent to other publications. This might be a case of some G16 models in other territories having this function, but I highly doubt that. Having a numpad does not legally qualify or disqualify a laptop from being sold in any territory in the world, so why would ROG take it out of some models? I don't know, this might be a marketing mishap, but as of shooting this video, the mistake is still visible on the ROG website. Let's head on over to the ports. On the left side, we have the 3.5mm headphone and microphone jack combo, two USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C ports that support 100W power delivery, and DisplayPort 1.4 out. We have an HDMI 2.1 out and an RJ45 LAN port as well. On the right side, we get two USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-A Super Speed ports. This port selection is really fine. I always have to applaud gaming laptops that have an RJ45 port. One thing I want to point out though is that the USB Type-A ports are located where your mousing hand is, so if you've got wired peripherals, better make space on your desk. I do understand ROG's decision to put these ports here though, as 30% of every side and the entire back of the laptop are just straight up vents now. Yes, we've reached a point that we've hollowed out a good huge part of laptops just to cool the hot internals that we put into them. But we'll talk about what makes the STRIX G16 hot later on in the video. Before we tackle the display, let's see what's on top of it first. The STRIX G16 marks the return of the webcam to the STRIX line after a 4-year-long absence. It is just a 720p webcam though, but given the right amount of light, it can actually look pretty okay. It's perfectly usable for like basic streams and Zoom meetings, but yeah, anything beyond that, you're gonna have to get a better camera. It does lack an IR sensor though, so yeah, no face unlock via Windows Hello. But the great AI noise cancelling mics make a return, and it's still great as ever. Alright, this is where things start to get a little funky. First off, I want to mention that I fully support the move to larger 16x10 displays. We've previously seen this shift of standards from 16x9 to 16x10 in professional and creator laptops, and I welcome it in the gaming space as well. But with that said, I find that there is a huge catch to the things I like and dislike with the screen on the Strix G16. Let's start off with the specs. The ROG STRIX G16 display is a 16-inch 16x10 1920x1200 IPS display that runs at a 165Hz refresh rate with a 7 millisecond response time. It covers 100% of the sRGB color gamut, supports Dolby Vision HDR, G-Sync, and is connected to a MUX switch with NVIDIA Advanced Optimus. So far so good, right? It is a great performing screen that runs fast and has good enough color for most AAA titles. My two gripes with it are its lower than usual brightness, which cannot fight a well-lit office, never mind sunlight at a coffee shop, and the bigger gripe, it's got some bad backlight bleed. I've seen this mentioned by a few other publications, and it's just straight up noticeable. Right at the first startup, you can clearly see backlight inconsistencies. Now, I kind of understand this because it is the first year that 16x10 screens are becoming standard across the gaming segment, so production facilities for these larger displays still have some ways to go to perfect these larger panels. Like I said before, this is a perfectly serviceable, even enjoyable screen. But man, it just feels like a long step back from the wild out 300Hz screen that we got with the previous generation Strix G15, especially when we're paying more hard-earned money for this generation of Strix G models. As is usually connected with my evaluation of the display, the speakers. Here's the sound test against my JBL Quantum Duo speakers. As we can hear, they are okay speakers at best, nothing close to the big, detailed and wide sound that the ironically smaller and slimmer Zephyrus models can put out. The sound is serviceable when it comes to volume and quality, but it's much too mid-centric to be detailed, and while it can do mid-bass, there's just no lower bass to hear. It'll be okay for gaming, but don't expect it to wow you during Netflix nights. The ROG STRIX G16 model with me is running the Intel Core i7-13650HX, which has 20 CPUs running at 2.6 GHz with a boost clock of 4 GHz. It's running the NVIDIA RTX 4060 laptop GPU with 8 GB of GDDR6, 16 GB of DDR5 4800 MT/s RAM, and 1 TB of NVMe PCIe 4 M.2 SSD storage. The other variant of this laptop available here in the Philippines is practically the same, with just a lower spec NVIDIA RTX 4050 laptop GPU with 6 GB of GDDR6. And yeah, what can I say? It's got monster performance under the hood, so it performs as well as you imagined. During my unboxing video, I tested this out on Battlefield 2042 at ultra settings, and it comfortably averaged 70 to 80 FPS during that entire playtest. But we'll be talking about performance numbers later. Opening up the case, we can see the all-new cooling system by ROG for its 2023 line of laptops. It's now a 3-fan setup, with 2 large fans at the back and 1 smaller fan at the front. There are 7 heat pipes connected to the fans and blocks, which lead to a huge heatsink array that spans the entire rear of the laptop. Also, we can see here at the bottom that it's powered by a 90 Wh battery, which is in line with what we've seen with previous Strix G models. We can also see here that you can add another RAM stick to max it out at 32 GB, and you can also add another M.2 SSD here. Alright, time for some numbers on the screen. For the ROG STRIX G16, since it comes with two options for power delivery, the 280W full brick and the compact USB-C power delivery 100W brick, I tested everything on both and computed the performance difference just to see what kind of performance you're either gaining or leaving on the table if you went for either brick. Let's start with synthetic benchmarks. The Strix G16 on 3D Mark 280W scored 10,465 points on GPU, 13,824 points on CPU, with an overall score of 10,860 points. Switching over to the 100W brick nets you a GPU score of 9,579 points, a CPU score of 10,449 points, with an overall score of 9,700 points. That's an 11% decrease in performance when switching from the 280W brick to the 100W brick. On Cinebench R23, the 280W brick brought about a multi-core score of 20,288 points and a single-core score of 1,835 points. The 100W brick was able to eke out a multi-core score of 12,684 points and a single-core score of 1,742 points. This is somewhat fascinating since you're losing about 37% of performance in multi-core, but only 5% in single-core performance. So if you're going to be using single-core programs while on the go, it's not a bad idea to just go for the smaller, lighter 100W brick. For gaming, I tested it out on 4 games: Dirt 5, Cyberpunk 2077, Battlefield 2042, and just for kicks, Valorant. Starting out with Dirt 5 and 1200p ultra settings, the 280W brick scored an average of 84 FPS with a 1% low of 35 FPS. Downgrading to the 100W brick just barely got the laptop through with an average of 77 FPS with a 1% low of 26 FPS. That's an average drop of 8% with a 1% low drop of 25%. That's a lot. And a drop from 35 FPS to 26 FPS spells the huge difference between still playable and borderline frustrating performance in a fast-paced rally game. Cyberpunk 2077 at ultra settings, RTX on with DLSS set to balanced, is a different story. The 280W brick averaging at 66 FPS with a 1% low of 27 FPS compared to the 100W average of 61 FPS with a 1% low of 27 FPS. That's an average drop of 7% with a 1% low drop of 14%. Not as drastic as the performance drop we've seen in Dirt 5, but then again, this relies more on the predictable performance padding and gains of DLSS 2.0 than anything else. Battlefield 2042, another notoriously CPU-bound game, continues the trend we saw in Dirt 5. On the 280W brick, it averaged 72 FPS with a 1% low of 39 FPS. And on the 100W brick, it averaged 54 FPS with a 1% low of 22 FPS. Yikes, you're losing 25% on average frame rates and 43% on 1% lows. This correlates to the drop that we see in the synthetic benchmarks, where we see multi-core CPU performance take a large hit when switching from the 280W to the 100W brick. Battlefield 2042 is heavily reliant on the CPU for those large-scale 128-player maps, and it shows. Lastly, we have Valorant. Look, Valorant is an esports title and as such is fairly easy to run on any kind of hardware. On the 280W brick, it averaged 360 FPS with a 1% lows of 290 FPS. Switching over to the 100W brick nets us an average of 310 FPS with a 1% low of 266 FPS. That's a drop of 13% performance on average FPS and a drop of 8% in 1% low frames. It's in line with our findings from Cyberpunk 2077, but I feel that this drop is totally negligible since all of those frame rate stats are way past the Strix G16's 165Hz refresh rate. So no matter which brick you go with, you're getting max performance out of the screen in Valorant. Just to finalize this tally, we see a total aggregate performance drop of 13% in average frames and a drop of 22% in 1% low frames when you're switching from the 280W brick to the 100W brick. Take this into account when you're planning to head out with the Strix G16 and you don't know which brick you're going to need. In the performance tally, we saw how much that Intel Core i7-13650HX was dependent on power input in the Strix G16. But on battery, we see a whole nother side of the processor, how it can just sip at the battery if needed. In moderate work use, it was able to last 6 hours and 37 minutes at the silent power setting, which is pretty unheard of. In gaming though, it was able to last a little under an hour and a half in performance mode, 1 hour and 26 minutes to be exact, which is still somewhat impressive. Thermal performance on the other hand might leave some worries on the table. Idle temps sit at around 55°C, moderate use bumps that up to 69°C, and on turbo, we see temps reach up to 94°C on a pretty intense game of Battlefield 2042. Fan noise is pretty wild too, with the Strix G16 adding another fan to last year's already pretty loud twin blowers. Here's a sound test. As you can hear, there is some Coil whine to this model. I've checked around Reddit and it looks like the 2023 models are quite susceptible to it. As with most tech products that can get Coil whine, please buy this laptop from a reputable dealer with a good return policy, so if you do experience Coil whine with your model, you can easily exchange it for one that doesn't have it. For the first time in my experience of reviewing the Strix model line from ROG, I'm a bit torn. Maybe I've been quite used to just saying it's a good value laptop, just buy a webcam with it and you're good to go. But the Strix G16 feels somewhat like a wary sell to me. Let's look at the facts. You're paying a bit more for a bigger screen but has a few flaws to it, strong specs but run hot and run loud, and a form factor that will break your back faster than before. Those are trade-offs that we haven't seen from this line before. Yes, you still get guaranteed performance, and if that's all you're looking for, by all means, just go for it. But if you're looking for a complete, comfortable, worry-free experience, the Strix G16 might just not be the perfect fit. This is the dawn of new standards for the line though, and historically, the first gen of any product usually has some flaws that haven't been ironed out yet. And that's what the Strix G16 feels like. So that's the ROG Strix G16. Do you have any questions about this laptop? Please let me know in the comments. As always, please like and subscribe, check out my previous video, and stay tuned to my channel for more tech and tech adjacent videos. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.